First Sunday of the month, and this is a big month in Unity. Both of our co-founders, Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, or Myrtle and Charles, if you go in birth order, were born in August. And as such, I thought, let's start off the month with happy birthdays. And this is also the month, our 12 powers. If you're new to Unity, that's a way we describe spiritual aspects of ourselves, that the faculties that we have, the divine powers that we have, the ability to get out of our human self and really transmit into the divine self, the eternal self, that part of us that is ageless and timeless and eternal. As representative of the 12 disciples, as represented by colors, as represented by body parts. And that might sound kind of woo-woo. For me, it's been a wonderful spiritual tool to help me remember things and to reinforce reminders, especially in places where, you're not really supposed to have religious attire or religious attributes on you. And yet I can just wear clothing that reminds me of the colors of the powers that I want to enshrine. So our power this month is the power of will, which is, as you can see on the screen, oops, let's go back. The ability to choose, lead, and decide. And it's represented by Matthew, and he represents the decision-making part of the brain. Corresponding color is silver, and the location is the front of the brain. And just as a sidebar trivia time, this was my subject for my final examination presentation. So yes, I know a little bit about the concept of will. So learning to activate the divine will in your life does not mean that you will simply submit to the human will of others. And I find it really interesting that when Charles Fillmore, our co-founder, put these ideas together and found a way of taking all of these spiritual thoughts and making it into something that was a little smaller to digest, the joke about eating an elephant, one bite at a time. The idea that we could do one power for each month. And the power of will really comes through in the history of our co-founders and how Unity came to be. So let's do a little walk through history. So I want you to put on your history caps here. I know a lot of people don't like history, so fair warning, I'm a history geek. I've spent time at the Unity Village Archives researching our history. I have been blessed. I did some work for them, and in exchange, they gave me permission to scan photos back in the day, like this is 20, 25 years ago, that I could share with the Unity community. So all of the slides that you're about to see, the pictures are from the archives, and I just want to give a shout out to Unity Village Archives for gifting me this permission to share this material with you today. So let's start at the beginning. So just where we are, we're in the 1840s in the US. We're in Ohio, actually. And I want you to take a good look at these folks. These are Myrtle Fillmore's family members. We're not sure who exactly, but we know that Pagetown was named after the Page family. And there were a lot of them. Her parents were prolific, shall we say. Some of her siblings did not survive to adulthood. Myrtle was towards the end of the line, and there were a number of things going on in the family that influenced her growing up. They were Methodist. Now, that's not to say that Methodism is a bad thing. I have a lot of Methodist ancestors myself. But what I do know about Methodism is that comparatively to Unity, it's much more rules-oriented, thou shalt not oriented. And really, Myrtle didn't feel like she belonged to some extent. She writes in a letter to Charles later that she was at a church picnic and how she was admiring nature and not really paying attention to the preacher because she found and felt the presence of God in the nature around her, which kind of went against what the Methodists taught. So she was a bit of a rebel in that way. As I said, I mean, it's enough that we've put a historical marker there. If you blink, you'll miss it. But it gives you a sense of what Myrtle would have grown up with. The idea, as I just said a couple slides ago, about not having to buy into someone else's human will. I would not want to live in a small town, for starters, okay? I have enough privacy that I would not want everybody knowing what I'm doing. And I certainly would not want to be the daughter or granddaughter of someone who founded the city, because, you know, the expectations on you would be great. And yet, as I've just said, you know, Myrtle was very much her own woman and went against the human will and went into the divine will. So here she is, some of the earliest pictures we have of her. She was born on the 6th of August, so happy birthday yesterday, 1845. So that would make her 177 if anyone's counting. Myrtle's family had a history of tuberculosis in it. And so she grew up being told, you're going to get tuberculosis, you're going to die young. So, you know, don't make plans for yourself because it's not going to happen. And this is where we see her awareness of her spiritual self coming through, that she said, okay, I'm going to go be a teacher. Because in those days, if you were a teacher, you could not get married. You could not have a family. A second that word got around that you were seeing someone, you know, the board of trustees in most contracts, they not only had the right to say yay or nay to who you know, were seeing, but also had the possible power to terminate your contract. Certainly your contract would be terminated upon your marriage. So we have this woman who's saying, no, I'm going to teach. And so she does. She goes to Oberlin College. Remember that name, it comes back up later. At that time, 1 year of college was deemed enough to teach in a one-room schoolhouse with all of the grades and all of the ages and all of the learning abilities. So just that alone is a wonderful thing to honor her, to say she was willing to be with the children. She was willing, she understood that she had a purpose within herself to teach children, and she wasn't going to let anything, not a health diagnosis or prognosis, stand in her way, not the rules and regulations of the time. She was going to make it happen somehow. Now we're going to go over to her husband, or eventual husband, Charles. He's born in Minnesota. And if you know anything about Minnesota, it is cold in the winter. It can be cold in the summer. It can be hot and humid too, but the extremes of temperature are quite noticeable. He's born up here in St. Cloud. And at that point, it was very rugged. It was not urban the way it is now. And his parents actually, well, they divorced, as it were. And his dad moved 10 miles away, built himself a cabin, and he and his brother Norton would alternate between living with their mom and living with their dad. Some of you who maybe have been in Unity a while know that Charles had a skating accident as a young boy, from which he never truly recovered. And so he was homeschooled. He too refused to accept that that was all that he had, to be an invalid and live at home and do basically nothing but subsist. And he went to a friend of his who was being homeschooled and asked that boy's mother if she would teach him as well. Interesting. That lady had also gone through Oberlin College to be a teacher before she got married and had to give up her teaching roles. So even though Myrtle and Charles had very different upbringings, they had this commonality of being taught at Oberlin College or being trained through someone at Oberlin College. So they had similar backgrounds. They had the same knowledge base, so that when they meet eventually in Texas, yeah, they get around in this time. It's quite amazing, actually. They have something that they can talk about. They meet at a literary society, but I'm getting a little ahead of myself here because I got to put in the Canadian content part. Charles's mother was actually born in Nova Scotia, and she lived there until her teens when the family moved to Minnesota. So there's your Canadian content. So we have a linkage. I know some people say, oh, we don't have much unity in Canada. Yeah, we do. It's just back a couple generations. So here are the earliest pictures of Charles I could find in the archives. So because of his health, because he walked with a limp and a brace at times on his leg, he had some damage to his hearing and sight from the accident. He ended up doing a number of jobs. What I find interesting is every one of those jobs, you can take a aspect of it, whether it's a skill or a knowledge or an application, and you can see how he pulled that into the unity movement as it was forming, as it was growing, as it was expanding. So this is unfortunately a damaged photo. I've cleaned it up as best I can with my knowledge of how to do this. But this is around about the time they got married. And they got married in Texas, as I said, after a 5-year courtship done mainly by letters. And Charles wrote later that when he first saw Myrtle, literally across a room at a literary society meeting, something inside him said, "Charles, that's your wife." So how romantic is that? But it took 5 years of corresponding. And the letters that have survived, or the aspects of it that have survived in other sources, writings and Sunday talks and things like that, tell us that there was this interesting dance between the two of them of their human understanding and their divine understanding. And Myrtle in particular is very open about what she believes and how she believes, and how she realizes that other people think that she's kind of crazy and that she's, not believing properly. But she knows that he understands. So they truly were, of one mind in many ways. Oh, I didn't give you Charles's date of birth. So he was born on the 22nd of August, 1854. So he was actually younger than his wife. He would be 168 were he still alive in the flesh. So we have this time, they get married in 1882, that is. And shortly thereafter, they have their first son, Lowell. And Rickert comes in 1884, and Royal comes in 1889. So they're doing what normal people do in the 1880s. They get married, they start a family. Having 2 children in fairly short time really pays a toll on Myrtle's body. And she is told by the doctors that she has maybe 6 months to live. And as one might expect, a woman who's got small children being given a terminal diagnosis, she starts reaching out everywhere to find a way to not die, basically. And she goes to a lecture. And what's interesting is those of us who have been studying Unity history, I have one book still to read, but I have not been able to find in the archives much of anything about who the speaker was, other than they were from a Chicago New Thought group, and the one line that Myrtle took with her from the lecture. I wish I could read the whole thing. I'm sure there were some other gems in it. But she came out saying, "I am a child of God, and therefore I do not inherit sickness." Talk about using your divine will. She was willing to say, this is false. This is not true for me. My truth is that I am a child of God. And she spent the next 2 years in prayer and meditation, asking her body's forgiveness for the thoughts that she had held about that it was going to be sickly, that it was going to be frail, that it was going to have a very short lifetime. And she affirmed all of the healing and all of the spiritual aspects of her body, and she lived on. And in fact, 3 years after this initial awareness, she has the 3rd child, Royal. She would have been 42-ish at the time, which even today is still a high-risk pregnancy. And the fact that she carried him to term, and by all accounts, he was a healthy baby and grew up into a man, is quite the story. Charles, not having been raised in such a formalized religious background, is watching Myrtle. And he's a voracious reader, he's a thinker, and he comes to the idea, in this Babel, I will go to headquarters. If I am spirit and this God they talk about so much is spirit, we can somehow communicate, or the whole thing is a fraud, which has been quoted elsewhere as either I can go directly to headquarters as the whole thing is a fraud. So he too was letting go of the human will, the human ideas, and moving into a space of his divine awareness. So as these things happen, word starts getting around that something's happening with Mrs. Fillmore. She was on death's door, and all of a sudden she's pregnant and has a third child. They have Charles is also doing some healing work, following Myrtle's practice. And he too is feeling better and feels that his sight and hearing are improving. So here you can see a picture of Myrtle and her 3 boys. And you can tell it's an older picture because they've had to hold very still for a while. So at the time, Charles was working as an assayer in real estate. If you go into Kansas City, Missouri, and you go north of the river, you can actually find a subdivision that he laid out, and the city streets, as far as I know, still bear the names of his brother and a few other family members. In 1892, Charles and Myrtle wrote their dedication and covenant. It's written in Charles's handwriting, as you can tell. I'm not sure he would get an A for penmanship, but let me read it to you so that you can follow along here. We, Charles Fillmore and Myrtle Fillmore, husband and wife, hereby dedicate ourselves, our time, our money, all we have and all we expect to have, to the Spirit of Truth, and through it to the Society of Silent Unity. It being understood and agreed that the said Spirit of Truth shall render unto us an equivalent for this dedication, in peace of mind, health of body, wisdom, understanding, love, life, and an abundant supply of all things necessary to meet every want without making any of these things the object of our existence. In presence of the conscious mind of Christ, this 7th day of December, AD 1892, and then it's signed by them both. Now, no one publicly knew about this dedication and covenant until after Myrtle had passed. It was found in her papers as they were being transferred to what is now the archives. But it shows the underlying idea that they are willing to do this, and in exchange, they will receive this. And the line that always jumps out at me is that without making any of these things the object of our existence, that it's not about making the money to be well-dressed, that it's not about being the most publicly known person, but rather it is the simplicity of doing spiritual work in the human consciousness and sharing that message with others. One of the things they had was the Unity Tract Society. That's actually Charles with the beard, second from the left, sort of towards the center. And one of the things that I find really interesting was their good stewardship in the early days. You know, it might be tempting to take out loans or whatever. And there were times that they had to make purchases on account. And the story goes about a time when the repossessors were coming to take the printing presses. And it was suggested that they take it into prayer. And one of the workers suggested, well, let's pray the money holds out. And Myrtle is reported to have quietly said, no, let's pray that our faith holds out. And I think that's, for me, the biggest thing about the Fillmores was that they had the willingness to put shoes on their prayers, to do the walk and the talk, to not just pontificate, but rather to demonstrate in their own lives how they were using spiritual principles to make the best of their life, regardless of what the outer circumstances appeared to be. So this was an architectural plan for what unity would have looked like. It wasn't built quite like that. But the fact that they had a plan, the fact that they had an idea of what they could do, that it wasn't going to be enough to just have Charles give Sunday talks and perhaps a midweek lesson or class, that it needed to be something universal, that they understood that there was a message there that the world wanted to hear, needed to hear, and I would suggest still does. Most of these buildings are now gone. In fact, all of them are gone, minus the one that's called Church and Library. That is Unity Church Universal. But you can see here, they had garages, they had a power plant, they had their own printing room, they had everything that they needed contained, including the cafeteria, which is the Unity Inn, to do the work that they felt they were called to do. And I give them credit because there were a lot of naysayers. There were a lot of people, even now, who say that we're a cult, who say that we don't, truly understand Jesus's message. Respectfully, blessings on your path, not mine. So finally, a tribute to the Fillmores that founded our movement, who found a way to take their spiritual path and create something that has lasted over 100 years, has blessed untold people, and continues to do so, and will continue to do so as we move forward in our understanding, in our ability to say, I am willing to. And this was an affirmation from a couple of years ago, and I think it so perfectly sums up, certainly our co-founders. I use my power of will to choose and commit and to be willing to follow things through to their conclusion. And now I have something a little different for our time of meditation. I'm going to invite the co-founders to pray us in. So you may want to turn your volume up on this. It's a historical recording, and I've got it as loud as I can have it at my end, but just so you know.
God is my help in every need. God does my every hunger feed. God walks beside me, guides my way through every moment of the day. I now am wise, I now am true, patient, kind, and loving too. All things I am, can do and be, through Christ the truth that is in me. God is my help, I can't be sick. God is my strength unfailing quick. God is my all, I know no fear. Hence God and love and truth are here. Amen.
Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, in earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts, as we also have forgiven our debtors. And leave us not in temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen.
And now, as we move into our time of prayer and meditation, I'm going to invite you to breathe into this moment. Bring yourself back into that moment we opened our time with. And I invite you to, within the core of your being, consider the statement or the question on the screen. Looking back on my life, can I see events, interactions, or learnings which weren't specifically spiritual, but have assisted me on my path of spiritual growth? And I'm just going to invite us all to take this quietly within ourselves for a few moments of silence, allowing these words to just flow through us. And as we open our memories and allow past lessons to come back to us, perhaps something we'd forgotten, perhaps something at the time that seemed odd, unusual, out of character, and yet with fresh eyes we can see what a blessing that turned out to be. And in that consciousness, we give thanks for these blessings, for these opportunities to grow, to learn, to share, to be a teacher to others, to be a model of love and peace and harmony, to be a lighthouse to all who struggle, to know that what the lessons have been that I have learned, I can take those lessons and shine them out into the universe and show others that the path is not darkness, that there is a light, that there is a path, that I won't crash against the rocks, but rather I can follow the path of others while leaving my own unique steps behind me for others to follow. And as we bring this time of meditation and contemplation to a close, I invite you to also take within our silent unity affirmations for the month of August 2022. Our affirmation for inner peace. The peace of God flows within each breath. Breathing in these words. The peace of God flows within each breath. Our affirmation for healing. In all circumstances, I heal, knowing I am whole. Breathing in. In all circumstances, I heal, knowing I am whole. Our affirmation for harmony. In the harmony of divine love, I bless my relationships. Breathing these words in. In the harmony of divine love, I bless my relationships. Our affirmation for prosperity. Freely I give and freely I receive in divine abundance. Breathing in. Freely I give and freely I receive in divine abundance. And finally, our affirmation for world peace. In a spirit of peace, I seek to understand and appreciate others. In a spirit of peace, I seek to understand and appreciate others. And so it is, and so it shall be. Amen.